Um, I wanted to let you guys know too, assignments are in, and I can see that assignments are in. I will get to that. I've got a bit of a backlog for another subject I need to clear first, but I will get to your assignments in the next week. Um, this week's content is really about how we look at um, embedding safety and maintaining safety through a lens of, so we have a bit of a talk at the end about what happens when there's a critical incident. So I think safety, I mean, we could talk for hours on, each principle, but I think safety is truly the foundation for all of the other principles, particularly in an organization. So we're kind of moving a little bit away now from applying trauma-informed practice with our clients and our client base, whoever that might be, and more into a lens of organizational safety and how leadership can embed that safety, how other people in the organization can uphold that safety. And then we'll have a quick talk about assignment 4, which is coming up too. I know sometimes you guys must feel like, my God, I just handed one in and now there's another one. But I like to be a little bit on top of that early, particularly because we've only got one more week of subject content after this. So all of the questions will follow usually. Um, so I feel like this is a little bit disjointed only because last week wasn't run live. So, and it was, I think I remember recording it right before I left, and it was a little bit shorter than I normally would have done. Um, but I know that we touched on trauma-informed organizations and I guess the journey, I hate that word, but the journey most organizations are on from a trauma-aware position to trauma informed. And I know that's not common language either, right? Like we hear trauma informed all the time now. We don't really hear a lot about trauma aware, even though the models that we look at really consider that that's kind of the first step is being trauma aware. Um, that's also, it's not a linear process moving between those levels, right? There's 4 levels, a trauma informed being at the end. It's not linear. We don't just nicely move between them, particularly because trauma informed practice is always kind of shaping and growing. And so, like any kind of discipline, I suppose, we do things one way and then we kind of step back and research and reflect and think, there might have been a better way that we could have done that. So the practice shifts a little bit. But last week, we spoke about safety being kind of one of the first principles that needs to be embedded because without safety, we don't really have the others. Um, and I think we spoke a little bit about maybe a basic outline of some of the ways that that can be done, but I really want to kind of build on that tonight. So I have a little video for us to watch. I'll do what I normally do and just pop myself on mute while we watch this. But this just kind of grounds the conversation about what this kind of looks like. This fellow's got a lot of videos on YouTube, this Phoenix Trauma Center. Some of them are very long-winded, but if you do decide that trauma-informed practice or elements of trauma-informed practice is something that you want to learn a little bit more about, he's worth listening to. But I'll pop myself on mute and we'll come back at the end and just kind of have a bit of a reflection on some of the stuff that he talks about. Okay, you done just about? Yep. Mimi, were you going to talk? He looks like, oh, you putting thumbs up. Thanks, love. I know he's long-winded, but there's a lot in that. And I guess I just wanted to throw a few things out to you guys to see what you're thinking. He started by talking about hurt people hurt people. What do we think about that saying? Everyone's deep in thought. We don't know.
I think it's a ripple effect. And so it's a chain, it's pass on the violence, something like that.
Mm-hmm. Do we agree with that statement or do we not agree with that statement?
The importance of risk.
Say again, Charles, sorry.
The importance of risk at
Yep.
work.
Yep. Do we think hurt people always hurt people?
No, it's
Not in a physical, but in a emotionally.
Yep.
especially sometimes I found when they have the right support,
Mm-hmm.
then they can change the direction.
Yep. Sarah's shaking her head. I can see an imperceptible shake of the head there.
No, I was going to say they don't always hurt intentionally.
Yeah. Yep. I agree.
I do agree with hurt people do hurt people.
Yeah, I feel like that saying has been stolen and misconstrued a little bit in some of the things that I've read. I think people that have been hurt and not healed, yes, can absolutely hurt people without intending to. But I kind of think if we're looking at the likelihood of our population group experiencing trauma, our statistics tell us nearly everybody we know has experienced a significant trauma at some point in their lives. I worry that this blanket kind of hurt people statement might do us a bit of an injustice. Yeah, something about it grates on me. I don't know what it is. Maybe working for so many years with kids and young people carrying extraordinary amounts of trauma, and I think I wouldn't like to think that there are people out there who make an assumption that because they have been hurt that they will hurt others in response. Maybe that's what it is. Yes, Mimi.
I think because it's really contextual.
Yeah.
And if you cut the context, it's kind of, can mislead. But I think because he explained, I think it makes sense to me. And sometimes, certainly, depending on where you look at it, what angle, if you look at the end of these people, hurt people, if you can dig into the history, they may have a history of being hurt. So sadly, sometimes that's true.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you're right. I think it is contextual. I think it depends on how we look at it. I mean, certainly if you start digging into a serial killer's history, you'll find all of them have come from broken homes, abusive fathers or abusive mothers, or, there's a lot of that stuff kind of documented in really serious crimes. But yeah, I think it is contextual, and it's how we apply that to which population group we're applying that to. The other thing that I wanted to just tap into a little bit is the stuff that he talked about with the Google study and psychological safety. And that being, setting the basis for, I guess, respect at work, whether that's amongst colleagues or with our clients as well. And if you aren't aware, the Safe at Work report came out a couple of years ago, and as a result, Australia and certainly New South Wales has moved into positive duty legislation, which is meant to protect you as workers in the workforce. against things like sexual harassment, psychological trauma. It's forming the basis now of a lot of psychological injury claims and things like that. But I guess in a very small little nutshell, it is the employer's primary duty now to protect you from harm in the workplace. So not just to respond appropriately if or when harm happens, but to actively prevent that harm from happening. And so just like if you see a trip hazard in the corridor because some carpet's peeling up and you would let, whoever know, hey, that carpet needs to be fixed, someone's going to trip over on it. The workplace has a similar responsibility to protect you from things like sexual harassment. So it's really interesting to hear him talking about psychological safety because a lot of that stuff that we spoke about and a lot of the things that he spoke about is coming out of that and that help people feel safer at work, like paid time off and flexible schedules and support services are also linked in the research as being buffering factors to vicarious trauma. So they all kind of link into that topic of how do we have and how do we maintain a psychologically safe workplace where our workers are protected and we behave with respect with each other and we get the best out of ourselves and each other for our clients, because at the end of the day, we're trying to serve them as best as we possibly can. So that kind of is a nice segue into this is the blueprint for mentally healthy workplaces. It's put together by the Australian National Workplace Initiative. It's a very interesting document. If you want to, I will just pop that into the chat so that you can Google it and look it up in your own time. It's a really interesting document. It talks a lot about, I'll put the link here to how to set up a workplace so that we are protecting our staff, responding if something happens, and then promoting the positive kind of aspects of work that keeps people motivated and keeps people tapped into what they want to do. So all of this research that we've done on what helps employees stay at a workplace and what helps them engage and get the best out of it, because we don't want a workforce that just stays and becomes stagnant and is the ain't it awful club. We want the people that are, engaged in the work and really motivated internally. And some of it boils down to these couple of pillars. So if we have a look at the protect pillar, the framework that itself talks a lot about not just prevention. We're obviously trying to prevent workers from experiencing psychological harm. And we do that through things like flexible working policies. That's become 5 years ago, flexible working was unheard of, really, in the workforce. COVID's done wonders for that particular aspect of work, I guess. But also anti-bullying, anti-harassment, anti-sexual harassment in the workplace. So, like I said, that primary duty to make sure that they are having a sufficient training. So, I mean, it's common sense, right? We don't sexually harass each other. I'll find it for you, Mimi, and let you know. So, we know common sense, it's not okay to harass somebody sexually, but how a workplace can then demonstrate that they actively prevented that is through having work intranets that have all of these policies very clearly available. Now, I'm an entrenched government worker. I can't tell you how many times I click on a link on my work intranet and the link is broken. The page has been moved. I feel like government departments have like little gremlins that sit inside the IT and move things just to have a bit of a laugh at us next time we need something, thinking that we know where it is. If you can't, you can be in trouble as an employer if someone turns around and says, well, you can't take me to the tribunal for doing that type of behavior because I didn't actually know that that was wrong or discouraged in the workplace. And if you can't come back and say, well, no, hang on a minute, we've put you through training. Every year organizations have like code of conduct training or refresher training on how you're expected to behave in the workplace. If they can't demonstrate that they've done that or that you've got clear links to policy, that you've had conversations with your manager or your supervisor about certain things, or that you've engaged in training, the workplace can be in trouble. So just like, you know, on a building site, making sure people have got helmets and accurate protection, we actually need to make sure that all of our employees have proper equipment and proper training. And that kind of boils down to policy and wellbeing support options too. So it's one thing to kind of come back as an organization and say, oh yeah, but you know, we had this policy where people could take paid time off to study. But if it's not on your intranet and people don't know about it and therefore nobody accesses it, it's not a functional policy. Thanks, Mimi. So yeah, there's been some big kind of change in the fair work space about that, and the safe at work space, to make sure that people know what they're entitled to. And you've probably noticed in the last couple of years, your employer has probably rolled something out that's refresher training, or there's been some talk about positive duty. Yeah, because it's a thing, you know, there's a lot of claims that are kind of bit people in the bottom for not having all of that stuff clearly accessible. So the other thing is ensuring that we have people with lived experience of mental health accessible within our workplaces. So whether that's sitting on a board, whether that is as a consultant, but it really should be informing our policy and structure. We really should be leaning into people with lived experience to say, hey, you know, our organisation wants to you know, do better with a cohort. What's your input there? And particularly kids and young people too. Consultation and communication with workers and their representatives is another big one as well, in terms of called communities, ATSI communities, making sure that we are capturing the right kind of content and the right type of policy for those communities. Having things, and look, I think this is something an organisation's probably not, I don't know that any organisation does this particularly well, but having planning and processes for how to manage periods of increased demands or pressure. So if we look at COVID, and I remember at the time I was working for a different government department. I was working part-time for TAFE rather than full-time, but the organisation that I was working for absolutely crapped their DAX, because all of a sudden we had all of these files with all of this very sensitive personal information printed in paper form and no way to get it home to get through the work. And then if you did kind of manage to get it home, how did you then turn it over and get it back to a supervisor? It was brain bending. And so luckily we had some really good executive management that really swiftly engaged an online company to get all of our data online and get that in a format that was accessible across the board. But that, I think that taught, you know, certain departments a lot of things around what do we do if this happens again, and how do we help our staff in that situation, because COVID saw a lot of industries have huge amounts of burnout, huge amounts of, you know, personal fatigue. Compassion, you know, within the industry was really difficult amongst some leadership teams and things, in terms of what people were trying to balance at home and at work. So how do we have processes for how to manage things like that? Even if it's just, you know, a thought bubble and a hope that it never happens again. But, you know, the hope doesn't get us far if it does. And the other thing I guess that falls under this pillar is things like proactive approaches to address bullying and harassment and discrimination. And that's our positive duty stuff. So I think there's been, you know, some good leaps in that space the last couple of years in terms of addressing that. And that's all come out from the safe at work stuff. Okay, the second pillar is responding. So I guess working to ensure that when staff are experiencing mental ill health or distress in the workplace, that we're responding in the best way to them. This type of thing looks at incorporating policy and procedure in our systems. You know, naturally there's compliance with legal obligations. So how are we meeting our obligations with work health and safety? Things like workers' comp, workplace relations, privacy, discrimination, all of that kind of legislative compliance stuff. But I think on a more kind of fundamental human level, it's being able to recognize mental ill health in the workplace. And, we've spoken a lot about that this semester, that quite often it hides under different symptoms. And I think whereas when we're practitioners and we're looking at clients and we're pulling together symptoms and, trauma presentations, we've got a different hat on. But as a leader, I think sometimes that the temptation maybe is to fall into like productivity management and looking at why workers are not productive and performance management, and rather than really unpacking and going, you know what, like this is really unusual and Sarah doesn't normally work like this. I wonder if there's more going on. And some organizations are great at doing that. I'm not going to say it doesn't exist. Some leaders and some managers are really good in this space, but when you have a workforce that is churning through work, when it's understaffed, when it's under the pump, when there are KPIs not being met, when there are managers breathing down other managers' necks, I think we lose the human element really quickly. And the focus is really on churning through work and getting things done, rather than being able to unpack and just stop and go, you know what, this pattern of behavior is not actually typical of that person. And I don't know if they're okay. So recognizing and responding to that, and that includes vicarious trauma. And, I think I've mentioned before in my outside of TAFE, my other hat is to go into organizations quite often and deliver long days worth of training on vicarious trauma and how to spot that in your workplace and how to expect it. It's going to happen. It's not something that we can say our workforce has a gold star because nobody's ever had vicarious trauma. That's a ridiculous position to take. And I think as workers, we will all come across it. We'll all experience it to some degree in our careers. Being able to spot that quickly and respond to it is really important. And I think it kind of goes hand in hand is addressing stigma within organizations as well. Being able to say, and I'm thinking about law enforcement and stuff here, being able to say, I'm not having a good week. I've got some stuff that's sitting with me that's pretty heavy right now, and I don't think maybe I need to step away and do some non-frontline stuff for a while. And I think, unfortunately, the whole industry has some work to do on how we create space for that to happen. In saying that, it would fall under safe at work as a reasonable adjustment. So if somebody is experiencing some mental ill health in the workplace, it would fall under reasonable adjustment to support that person and to make alterations to their job role to enable them to continue coming to work and to continue working. Just like if someone had a broken foot and you needed to make a reasonable adjustment to help them get around the workplace. What else? Things like return to work and stay at work initiatives as well would fall under this response stuff here. So managing people who have had a workplace injury, whatever type of injury that is, and making sure that our policies are targeted at the group that we're working with, right? Like there's nothing worse than picking up an organization's policy on something and going, this makes no sense. It doesn't apply to our workforce. I don't know how to read it. I don't know how to interpret it. And if I had a team of people, I wouldn't know even how to explain it to them. So we have to make sure that our policies and our procedures are written in, everyday accessible language and people know what they mean and how to access that stuff. And the last bit's about promoting good mental health. And I say some of this stuff tongue in cheek because, I think if we've got the right conditions, then we can be the best leaders in the world. But sometimes we have to work with good enough conditions as well. So, I'm thinking about those bosses who turn up to work, no matter how sick they are, and they sit in an office and they cough and they hack and they splutter and they're not productive and they feel like shit and they're not in the best of moods. But the whole concept is, oh yes, but I turn up to work regardless of how sick I am. Or they work from home, but they continue to send emails to people. It's kind of what we want to see is leaders and organizations demonstrating that if you are unwell, stop working, stay home, right? You don't send 17 emails at 9 o'clock when you've had a big long sleep and you've woken up and opened your laptop again. just wait until tomorrow. The work will still be there at 9 a.m., you know? And I think, again, COVID taught us some good stuff around that. We've now got email systems that you can do all your work and then say, send it at 9 o'clock in the morning. We didn't have that before, you know, so that's great. That's allowed, you know, a whole bunch of people that have to work around little kiddies and school timetables and stuff to log on late at night, and for people's inboxes not to be bombarded until work hours, which is great. But it's kind of setting that example too, right? That your health and your well-being actually comes first and the work stuff comes later. It also looks at, I guess, opportunities for professional development. So making sure that we're really developing our staff and hoping to keep them in the workplace and not just letting them fester a bit in one role because they're good at it. I think organisations that do well at this pillar have really good staff recognition programs as well. Some of these become a bit tokenistic. When I've seen it done well, it is a culture around the office of someone walking past and going, hey, Mimi, I saw you out in the field today. You did a really good job. And that just being the norm in the office, not the standout. You don't have to have a monthly staff recognition award. If you've got one and it works, great. But I think it's more meaningful when someone actually hears a conversation go well and they can say in the moment, oh, you handled that really well. Good on you. Like, I don't know if I could have done it that well. And giving genuine feedback in the moment. And I think too, like if we're talking about a culture of promoting mental health and mental well-being, having meaningful connections at work. If you go out and do that Google survey on all of the jobs that you can think of that have really hard elements to it, child protection work, you know, emergency services, nurses, etc. If you go out and you interview them and say, what keeps you turning up after you've had a rotten shift the day before, 9 times out of 10, they'll say it's the people I work alongside. It's the people that are going to be there for me when I walk through the door, you know? So how do we foster those meaningful connections where we care and invest with each other? And that starts with our friend at the beginning, psychological safety. If we don't feel safe in the workplace, all this stuff falls over because, you know, that culture of caring about each other gets undermined by competition, or, you know, when recruitment decisions are not made transparently, or people start, you know, getting grumpy because one person's got more work than me or I've got more work than them. It's that stuff that starts festering under the surface and is a massive roadblock in trying to achieve psychological safety. And I think the other thing too is recognition and celebration of diversity and inclusion, and making sure that we're practicing in a way that really kind of empowers people and empowers our workforce. The other thing that I'll say, and I know I've probably banged on about Vicki Reynolds all year, Vicki Reynolds is like, she's my guru. I love that woman. She talks a lot about collective care. One of the other things she talks about is connecting to values. So if you are in a job and you're expected to practice outside of those values, that is the first kind of element that will start you disengaging from the work and disengaging with the population that you're working with. When you are encouraged to really lean into your values, when you feel like your work is making a difference to something, you know, that's why we all kind of come into community services work in some respect, is to make a difference to some cohort, some community in some way. When you feel at the end of the day that you have something you've done that day has truly made a difference, that's the stuff that's going to hold you in the workplace. So really connecting to meaning and purpose. Why do we keep turning up? Why do we do what we do when it hurts, or when it's hard, or when I'm exhausted and I don't want to anymore? So that's our 3 pillars of mentally healthy workplaces. I definitely think we are, you know, kind of still pushing into that. I think the other thing to mention too, a lot of the research around returning war veterans, particularly around Afghanistan and the levels of PTSD in people that came back, the biggest predictor about whether soldiers would return feeling mentally well or experiencing PTSD symptoms was good leadership. And what that boiled down to was leaders who were aware of trauma symptoms and making sure that those particular soldiers were well supported in the aftermath, and mind body was also supported. So not just a case of someone going, okay, you go access the gym or you go access some quiet time, but being able to actually access both. So facilitating connection to peers and other important people in their lives as well, but also allowing for professional debriefing. So that's a good kind of segue, I guess, into critical incident management, because debriefing, there's a lot of research on how critical debriefing is, but when it's done right. So this, I think, to me, this is one of the biggest ways organizations can embed safety, because when there's a critical incident and push comes to shove, you really do find out in a hurry how your organization is sitting in terms of peer support, in terms of how safe people feel with leaders and managers. So if we think about an example of maybe a hospital environment where there's been a significant resuscitation, or if you think about a client who's used violence in the workplace against, or it might be that a client has passed on, right? That's been engaged in the workplace for quite a long time and everybody knows who they are. Could be a significant workplace accident. These are all kind of critical incidents. It could be a community event similar to Bondi, right? That's felt very, very deeply within that particular community. There's a couple of different types of critical incident debriefing. You've got group debriefing. It could be something like workplace counselling. So an external consultant comes in and facilitates a discussion in a structured kind of group environment. They've got expertise in critical incidents. And then they do perhaps some post kind of group individual trauma debriefing. How do you guys feel about that? Do you think that would be a good idea or a bad idea? Do you think there's pros and cons to the group debriefing? Have you seen it done well? Have you seen it done badly? What's your take?
I've seen it being done really well.
Yeah.
I organise it a lot for my staff in out-of-home care.
Yep.
Especially when we've had critical incidents at a home.
Yep.
And I've seen it done really well. And then if one of the staff member gets kind of flagged in that, the counsellor will pull them aside and have a session with them on the side.
Yep. Yep. I've seen it used in the same way, child protection stuff as well. Yep. Anyone else? Anyone got any reservations about it? No.
Sorry, reservation.
Yeah, anyone feeling a little bit like, oh, I don't know about that actually?
I feel this when you come with group, there always group dynamics.
Yeah.
Depends the people.
Yeah.
Every individuals together. So
Yeah.
it could be very good and doesn't guarantee, because
Yeah. I think you've hit the nail on the head, Mimi. It depends on the group. Hey, I think you've got to have a really good understanding of who your people are in that space. Like you, Sarah, I've seen it happen in a team which has already got psychological safety, and the team have got each other's backs, and it's landed really well. And I've also been part of a CSC where we've had an entire office come together for a critical debrief after a child death, and it was awful. And I think it comes down to the facilitator's understanding of the group. I think sometimes the way that it's run, if people are allowed to talk, if they want to talk, and given the time and space not to talk, that's the best kind of way about it. Forcing people to talk about an event when they're not ready in front of other people, particularly their peers, is never a good idea. going over and over and over an event, as we already understand, solidifies that neural pathway and it further encodes that event into memory. So you can do more damage than good by forcing people to rehash what happened over and over again. And not everyone copes by talking. So there needs to be some space, I guess, given to people that, need to have quiet time and time away from the office to process a critical incident. The biggest thing is that it relies on psychological safety. And so in smaller groups, it's more likely that there's more safety than in bigger groups of people. It was very, very popular in the 80s and 90s. There's a lot of research to suggest now that having a one-off counselling session immediately after a traumatic episode actually does nothing to prevent the onset of PTSD. So it's more about a cumulative impact, and that cumulative impact is also more around knowing that your peers are, they've got your back if you need it, because you're invested and you care about those people, as opposed to an external consultant who's popped in, doesn't know who you are, doesn't have any ongoing relationship. Not to discount its place, it's important, and I understand why organizations do that to facilitate the bigger kind of debrief. But I think we need to also bear in mind the cohort of people that we're supporting, and when emotions are still very raw, how do we prevent secondary traumatization as well? And for most people, the usual coping mechanism for anything that is really hard is to spend time with their support network. So their family, their friends, their colleagues. How do we offer an opportunity for people to have time away from the workplace to actually do that? Is part of that critical incident management too. Okay, that's the end of tonight's topic. I just want to spend a couple of minutes kind of touching base on this. I'm very happy to leave space next week for this assignment task. So if you just plant the seed tonight and then go off and have a think about what it is and which organization you're going to study, and then we can bring it back next week for final questions. I'm very happy to do that too. Assignment 4 is a case study on an organization. We've given you 4, I think, maybe 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yep. Mostly because we've done a lot of research on these particular organizations and there's a lot of stuff available online. If you were busting yourself to do a particular organization that's not listed here, I'm happy to have an email conversation about it. But at this point in the semester, at this point in your energy levels, I would honestly say make your life easy and just do one of the ones that's already pre-established here. And your job is to critique a trauma-informed framework in the workplace to minimize re-traumatization and promote healing and recovery. So we are looking at these organizations. We are looking at what is immediately available online. This assignment, I don't know if it still says it, but it used to encourage people to call the organization and ask questions. I'm going to actively discourage you from calling the organization and asking questions, only because I feel like you're either going to get a really good receptionist who's going to go, oh, this is really cool, you guys are studying this, and give you everything you want. But more likely than not, you're going to get met with, where are you from? What do you want that information from? Who are you? It's not ideal. So, and they're all busy organizations as well. So I would say steer away from contacting them. Have a look at everything you can find online. ACON in particular has a document, I feel like it's their strategic plan or their annual report, maybe. They're all accessible online and they're really good. So you can go through that, and it talks about stuff like policies for staff well-being and recruitment for staff diversity and things. So those pillars that we just spoke about in terms of, trauma-informed frameworks and how are we making sure that the organization is at least trauma aware and working towards becoming trauma informed. If you look at, okay, well, what are the hallmarks of a trauma aware organization? And then look at what you're actually spotting in terms of that organization. So key tips, and we can come back, like I said, and talk about this next week. You can focus on the entire organization, or you might choose to pick one program. So if I think of something like DCJ, it would break my brain to try and talk about how that whole organization is trauma aware or trauma informed, because it's made up of all these other little smaller, like smaller groups. It's a statewide organization, so trying to bend my head around how the entire state is operating in a certain way would hurt my head. So you can choose, if it's a big organization, to focus on one particular service. You might look at Anglicare's out-of-home care, for example. Some organizations might be trauma aware, but they might not have explicitly applied a framework to the workplace. You might still, though, be able to say, hey, I can see that there are policies and procedures here, though, that look at things like staff wellbeing, staff leave, flexible working arrangements, positive duty legislation. What are the things that I can think of that organization is demonstrating they are aware that their staff population might have experienced trauma? And where you can't find information on that specific aspect, then I guess we have to look at applying research to identify what they might do in relation to that aspect. So you might say, I couldn't locate anything in any publicly accessible documents on ACON's website to say that they have a specific policy around, I don't know, diversity, inclusion. And then you could talk about the fact that ACON is specifically around a gender diverse, respectful workplace, and being the population that they work with have obviously taken steps to recruit, diversity in terms of people's preferences. So how you might kind of apply a hypothetical or say, this organization could benefit from, that might be some analysis that you apply to that. You might not be able to find out if they do staff induction and what topics are covered, or you might find an organisation that says, we talk about trauma-informed practice from our recruitment, from our interviews. What do you know about trauma-informed practice? So we're already kind of, talking about that from the beginning. And so again, if you decide to contact the organisation, look, I'm just going to say, don't do that. Don't contact them. I don't think any of these organizations need 15 people cold calling out of the blue to ask about, trauma aware. Yes, Mimi.
Hi, I have 2 questions.
Sure.
It's and one, so this assessment for its case study, do we have to do like introduction, conclusion, or we just have these 4 things? Like,
no, I wouldn't.
Okay.
And you can use first person language, that's fine.
Okay.
I have chosen to do ACON. ACON is an organization that is blah, 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 blah. You might include a little bit of information on their demographic or something, just to give a bit of a background of the organization, but you don't have to it's not an essay.
Okay, so just some subheadings, that's good.
Yeah.
And another one's about word limit. I noticed you said I had too many words, but I found it's like I was 10% over. At 10% over, I checked that it's what's that on course guide?
If
It's
that's
allowed.
the case, Mimi, sometimes when the word count loads into Turnitin, sometimes it counts your introduction page and your references as well. I'm usually cautious to take that away, but in your case, if I haven't, just email me and let me know and I'll go back and have a look at it. I don't actually take a lot of marks off for being over the word limit. I probably should take more than I do. But if you feel like I've discounted you marks and that's not fair, absolutely write back to me and say, actually, no, I was within the 10%. Can you have another look at it?
Oh, I don't feel it's unfair. Nothing about that. It's I'm happy about the thing. I just thought, you maybe I had that happen before. Some it's 1,500. I would have normally, because I have problem cutting word. Normally I got the maximum, like 1,650. So that would be 10%.
That's right.
Over.
Yeah.
That's including everything except for reference list.
Yes.
I checked that. I thought I was wrong. I actually checked that today at that this course guide. It says
Yep.
that I confirmed that. And this time I did that again. It's almost the maximum, but not over 10%. So
Yep.
I'm happy about that. Thank you for the feedback.
Oh, look,
it's all good. All good.
It's actually easier to waffle and have more words in than it is to cull. I find it much
Oh.
easier to write a 3,000 word essay than a 500 word one. I spend much more time on a smaller assignment than I do on a bigger one.
Yeah, it also helps.
Yeah.
I keep it kind of, it's just so difficult, but yeah, I tell myself do it. But it helps. I'm getting better.
It's tedious. Wait till you have to do an honours assignment and a thesis and you're sitting there ripping your hair out going, if I have to read this page one more time, but you've got to find 15 words on a whole page to cut out. And so you start thinking, how can I reduce this word and this word? Do they come together? It's just ridiculous. You get it's very tedious. But anyway, it's a good skill to have, writing concisely. All right, guys, I'm going to leave you to it. Next week, maybe what I'll do is pull up ACON's website or one of their websites and just point out a few little things to have a look at. But for now, in your prep, look for things like annual reports, strategic plans. Sometimes there's information on their recruitment procedures or who we're looking for, job ads, things like that, who we hire. They might have some stuff on their board about, whether they've got lived experience on their board or community consultation. I would look at all of that stuff. How do they get voices from their cohort into the organization if they do? I hope that's a good starting point for you. If you've got questions, save them all up and bring them next week. I'm sure other people would probably appreciate Q&A as well. All right. It's lovely to see you all. Charles, did you have a question?
No. I just said sound good.
Awesome. Have a great week ahead, guys, and I'll see you next week. I can't believe it's week 12. It's the last week. I'll see you then.
Sorry, it's week 12 or week 11?
Today's week 11. Next week is week 12. Sorry, scaring people.
That's okay.
You've had a heart attack.
That's not true.
No,
that's not true.
next week. Next week. We've got one more week together.
Thank you.
All
See you
right.
next
Take
week.
care, everyone. Good night.
Thank you. Okay, bye.
Good night.